in Baltimore and WNST.net. I know it's a baseball week around here. Hell, it's a basketball week. It's a golf week. But everywhere I am, it is a hockey week. I haven't had this guy on all season, and I want to bring him in here and sort of get us ready for what we're about to go through next week with the Washington Capitals. He's had a lot of pain, as we all have, who've followed the Capitals for many, many years. It's always fun to have Smoking Al Coking on from CSN, and we go back to the days of the Capitol Center. And, you know, Al, we've had everything around here but drinking out of the goblet and the champagne and parades and all that stuff. And I know it gets painful this time of year. And I know Trotzy came out to Greenmount Station with us a couple weeks ago, and I know he made another plea this past weekend to say, do not let the past get in the way of the future. And I think for all of us who have bad memories, that's kind of hard to do this week because we get constantly reminded about it. Right, Al?
You know, outside that locker room, Nestor, you're 100% right. Everybody's kind of acting like, uh-oh, what happens if they win another President's Trophy? That's bad. You know, I get where Barry's coming from, but you're right. Everybody else that's not really involved in that locker room and really doesn't have that great sense of history. It's funny because I was just talking with somebody recently, and it reminded me that coming up on April, I guess it's 18th/19th, it's going to be the 30th anniversary of that Caps Islanders 4 overtime Easter game. And we all know how that ended. And I can tell you, I was in the exact same spot in the Capitol Center. That night I was doing color commentary with the great Mike Fornes. 8 years later, I'm exactly in that same spot, a 4 overtime game against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the Caps lose that one. So, yeah, we have this scar tissue built up for longtime Capital fans. But I really think that this is a guy in Barry Trotz that if this is finally going to get shaken, it's a guy who doesn't have that history with him, coaching a team that doesn't have that history with him, that's going to finally break this curse once and for all.
Well, we would all ask this: what will make this year different, Al? Right? And I don't know what they could not have been a better hockey team constructed than they were last year, and it does feel like this year they've been better to some degree, bouncing back from bad losses, washing out that that Los Angeles, that hideous California trip 3 weeks ago. That feels like ancient history. But then it comes down to matchups, and going into this weekend, right? Are you pulling for Ottawa? Are you pulling for Toronto? I mean, certainly the California debacle opened their eyes to, hey, we don't want to be seeing the Penguins in the first round. We don't want to be seeing a rain. We don't want that kind of first round matchup. Well, it looks like they've played their way out of the abyss with that they are going to win the President's Trophy this week, right?
Absolutely, and I'll tell you something. You brought up a great point in that California debacle, and one thing that I recognized after that is, and Barry talks about this all the time, his leadership group. And even though he doesn't identify publicly who that leadership group is, we all know it includes guys like Brooks Orpik and Justin Williams. And a guy like Brooks Orpik, every time I talk to him, he has that sense of things get corrected and they get corrected quickly. I go back to early in the year. When's the last time, Nestor, and you're a guy who's covered all sports for decades, right? When's the last time you heard a team have a closed-door meeting after a victory? The Capitals did it early in the year after a game where they won, and they were awful in winning. They were sloppy, they were lucky, they got a victory out of it, but everybody to a man knew that is not acceptable. And this leadership group made sure the coaches left the room and closed the doors, and all of us in the media waiting to get inside the locker room or looking at each other. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed, almost 15 minutes passed. You knew something was going on in there, and that's what this group, I think, has done and identified. And Brooks Orpik was very adamant about how bad that West Coast trip was, that it wasn't going to happen again, and you saw what happened on their recent road trip, right? So they got off to a great start, then they phone in that absolute dead dog stinker in Arizona, and instead of letting that linger, what happens in arguably the biggest game of the year, they walk into Columbus, and for at least 50 minutes of that game, played near flawless road hockey and bounced back with a critical victory over Columbus. That's why I think you can look at this team and say it's a better self-correcting team. A coach can only do so much. If that locker room isn't controlled from the inside out, a coach can only have a certain say. As good a coach as Barry Trotz may be, if he doesn't have that leadership group, if he doesn't have guys buying into what that leadership group is telling him, it only goes so far. And that's where an area where I think if you're going to look big picture on why this season could be different, you look at how this team has responded to adversity, and that is what you see night in, night out in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Al Coca joining us here, of course, at Comcast Sportsnet, calling all the Caps action. I've been watching plenty of Caps, and I'm, Al, I almost booked a trip over to Europe in early June because I'm going over to pre-scout because the Ravens are playing in London, and we're taking a couple hundred people over there. So I was going to book, and I looked at the dates, and I'm like, I'm going to leave early June open. I'm just going to leave that alone. I don't want to get in the way, make a mess of that. I don't want to be canceling European trips on June 2nd because I've got to go to like Chicago or San Jose or LA or something. But, I would say this. All the years you and I have been watching hockey, there was always that thought, well, you got to have a hot goaltender, right? It was always about a hot goaltender that wins Stanley Cups. And we all believe that. We all know that to be true. You can't win it with a cold goaltender, right? But then there was the Ovechkin part of this, where as a young player, when they first started making the playoffs a decade ago, and there was so much pressure, well, he's the best player on earth. When's he just going to take over? When's he just going to take over? It was never really like that with Gretzky or even Lemieux or even Crosby, for that matter, or players that have been great players, or Kane, that have won cups. What I think we've realized here, it really is about the Winnocks, right? It's about the Beagles. It's about the thirds and the fourth lines where they weren't good enough last year. And I think for the Capitals and for McClellan and also for Barry Trotz, all the soul-searching they did after, having that Pittsburgh train hit them last year, it was really about how are we going to win every line? How are we going to win those matchups? And I think this team is more capable in that area. Over 80 games, overseeing it the whole year, this is a very, very deep team. And I don't think we've seen that. And certainly, the early years, certainly the Caps didn't have enough defense, right? I mean, they weren't balanced. Very, very hard to pick on what this team has done now that they've added Shattenkirk, right?
Absolutely. And listen, I go back to exactly what you said about third and fourth lines. I've always been a believer, and I say this in a lot of different sports. And every time I do talk radio, and we get people are telling me I'm crazy for thinking this, but I've always contended, and I'll use this example, for example, in the NBA. Even though I think it's ridiculous in many regards to kind of compare the NBA to the NHL in the sense that if Alex Ovechkin in a 60-minute hockey game plays 25 minutes, you're like, oh my God, that's a ton. Where if in a 48-minute basketball game, LeBron only plays 40 minutes, you go, wait a minute, what happened, right?
Right.
So, he has a much greater chance to determine the outcome of an NBA playoff game than Alex Ovechkin does in 20, 25 minutes of a NHL playoff game. That being said, other than last year, where LeBron justifiably won the MVP of the entire postseason in the NBA, go back 2 years. People probably don't remember that the MVP of the final series was Andre Iguodala. Go back a year before that, and before Kawhi Leonard has become the star that he is on a team that had Duncan, Parker, and Ginobili. Kawhi Leonard was the Finals MVP. It's the depth guys. It's the role guys. It's the extra guys, because I always see stars cancel each other out. Last year's playoffs, Nick Backstrom took Sidney Crosby right out of the series. The Kuznetsov line and the Malkin line basically neutralized each other. Where did the Penguins have the advantage against the Caps and every other team, by the way, that they played in the postseason? Bonino, Hagelin, Kessler. Those guys were the third line of the Penguins, and nobody, not even the Capitals, not the Tampa Bay Lightning, not the San Jose Sharks, had an answer for those guys throughout the entire playoffs. And you're correct. Brian McClellan sees that, identifies that, makes a trade for Lars Eller, brings in a Connolly. You've got now Andre Burakovsky bringing you the offensive weapon to that line, and we know what Jay Beagle has always been about. You pair him up with a big physical banging guy in Tom Wilson, who's become an outstanding penalty killer, and one of the great surprises of the season, Daniel Winnick. Suddenly your bottom six looks dramatically different and dramatically better than your bottom six last year. And with Shattenkirk now, if he's your third defenseman, all right, on our third pairing defenseman, I should say, think about that for a second. You've got three righties, three lefties, and oh, by the way, on your third defense pairing, one guy on the left side has won a Stanley Cup and is one of your team leaders and is among the leaders in plus minus and hits in the National Hockey League. Oh, and the other guy on the right side, he played in the All-Star game this year for the St. Louis Blues. That's balance that you haven't seen, and that is another reason why you think if it's going to be this year, these are the reasons why.
Smoking Out Koken joining us here from Comcast Sportsnet, talking all things Caps and hockey, and even mixing in a little NBA. You've been at this a long, long time at the Capitol Center, and Ted Leon's has sort of eased his way into this basketball ownership. He's been on the scene on the hockey side. This is the damnedest thing this year, right? I mean, that both of these teams have caught this lightning in a bottle because there was a lot of dry, dark springs in D.C., in that building where, you're waiting for U2 or the Stones or Springsteen to show up to fill it up, right?
No question about it. And, and let's also be honest, there have been times where you think, oh, this is going to be the spring. And as you brought out right at the top of the show, boom, the Caps get eliminated in a fashion that you think, how the hell did that happen? And the Wizards, the same thing. You think the Wizards are going for a long run? Up, there's John Wall getting hurt. And suddenly what could have been a great long run ends sooner than later. I think both teams right now seem to be built for a situation to where this can finally be the time where you say they go in as favorites and they come out and ready to go to the next round, as opposed to you come in as favorites and then Yaroslav Halak stands on his head or some other situation happens for either one of those teams. So finally, you think that this could be where you see everything working to your advantage. It's a long way off, and Lester, let's be honest. This is a game played on ice with a piece of rubber, right? I go back 2 years ago, 3-1. Caps are leading the New York Rangers.
Oh, man.
100 seconds left to go. A shot just gets thrown to the Capitol net on a line change. It deflects off Brooke Thorpe's skate, past Braden Holtby. Suddenly, the game is tied. And in overtime, the New York Rangers win, and that completely flipped the series around. Now, you go back and look at that play. Did anybody do anything wrong? Did the coach do something wrong? Did Orpik do something wrong? Did Holtby do something wrong? Did Ovechkin do something wrong? No. It's stinking hockey. It happens a million times a year. If that happens in the National Football League, what? It's called the Immaculate Reception, or they have an ESPN 30 for 30 on it, right? It happens almost every single game in the National Hockey League, and it just gets magnified when it's in the playoffs. So there is a oops factor, or a I can't believe that happened factor in hockey that is really rarely in any other sport. And that is something that you always have to take into account, and you can never really fully explain other than it's just hockey. That being said, you try and give yourself the best situation possible, try and prepare yourself for injury situations, for slumps, et cetera, and I feel that both teams, the Caps and the Wizards, have done exactly that by addressing what were perceived weaknesses coming into the season and during the season and addressing them. And now we just see if it all plays out.
Al, last thing for you, and I know you may whist a little romantic about this because you and I have known each other since you, me, and Barry, we all had a lot of hair, and I broke out the old pictures of Trotzy and I from back in the day, and the changing of the Murrays, rocking the Caps, and me covering Terry Murray and Brian Murray press conferences and the Capitol Center boardroom down there with Abe. For Trotz to have come back into this, you've been there for all of it. Every Cassidy, every Boudreau, every Schoenfeld, every Wilson, all of
every
it.
Adamo.
We can go through it all. Hunter, all of that stuff, right? For Trotz to have come back into this situation, I'm very romantic about it because if there's going to be a parade, there's going to be a trophy, it means even more to me that Barry Trotz would be the guy at the helm. But I don't see it rationally, but I do see the changes in this franchise over the last 2.5, 3 years since he's been back into this thing, and how it's different, and how I have a different belief system going into a playoffs because he's in it. And I think he has stabilized everything there. For Ted, for the fans, for the sponsors, he is so universally liked. And I have a personal affection for him, and I know you do because we've all known him most of our lives. But this is a really comfortable, weird thing for him to come into this, isn't it?
It is, but Nestor, that's exactly why, again, because you and I remember him from the from the Skipjack days, from the Portland Pirate days.
But everybody feels like they've known him forever. It's weird, isn't it?
No, I agree with that. But what you also then got to see, and at least I got to see it occasionally, it was very weird. The times I would fill in for Joe B when he would be sick or something else happened, there one stretch, there was 3 or 4 years, I ended up filling in for Joe B in Nashville. So you'd get to see Barry, and then you'd get to see his team up close and personal, and then you'd get to talk to the players who were playing for Barry. And all those things just reminded you of how detailed, how thorough he was, but also how everybody enjoyed playing for him and working with him. And I remember being on Comcast in the studio on the day that the move was made to fire both George McPhee and Adam Oates at the same fell swoop. And I said on the air, I said, let's finally do, as much as I disagree with just about anything Dan Snyder ever does, let's take one thing out of the Dan Snyder playbook, and that is bring Barry Trotz in for an interview, lock the door, and don't let him leave the facility until he signs that contract, because we're done with experiments. We're done with guys who have had good records of being a good assistant coach or a good junior coach or a good minor league coach. Give me a guy who's got a proven track record of success in the National Hockey League, like Barry Trotz, and who can absolutely finally get a group that's ready to win into a position to win. And finally, the Caps did the right thing by getting that experienced guy. And I remember Nestor walking in early in training camp, and he had already, months ago, had already figured out who's playing in which game, barring a couple changes here and there. Because, for example, he said, I want to see Burakovsky and Kuznetsov play against Philadelphia and Boston, because I know they'll bring some physicality. They'll bring some nastiness. I want to see how they stand up against that. The little details of an experienced professional coach brings to a franchise like the Capitals, who are begging for something like that, is almost immeasurable, and that's why I really believe if it's going to get done, it's certainly going to be on his watch.
Are you a believer, Koken? Come on, don't let me down. Be a believer. Do you picture that cup being raised in early June and lots of guys? I mean, Ovechkin, how gray will his beard be, right? I mean, I won't grow a beard at this point because I'm just afraid of how ugly and old I'm going to look if I do it, you know?
Nestor, I'm already getting a spot picked out on where I want to be on Pennsylvania Avenue.
You're already putting your lawn chair out.
Absolutely. I'm right there. I may even put some Natty Boh next to me.
Oh, you're just patronizing Baltimore now. Come on, Al. Wait,
Hey, when I was at AU, Natty Boh was my go-to.
What's all you can afford? I mean,
that's exactly right.
Hey, man, take care of yourself. I hope to see you ringside early, often, and well into June and well into the point where a lot of guys are really looking ugly, hopefully in early June. Al, take care of yourself. I'm sorry I don't have you on more often, but I always dig it when I do, man.
I appreciate it, Nestor. Good being with you, man.
Keep the faith. Rock the red. He is smoking. Al Koken, Comcast Sportsnet. You can, of course, follow him anywhere the internet is served, and, of course, anywhere hockey is served on game nights as the Caps play down the string here, hopefully en route to a President's Trophy and begin some playoff action in the middle of next week. We'll be there for all of that. Man, we got a lot going on, right? Baseball opening day. We had the National Championship. It's Masters Week. We got the Liars Luncheon in the NFL Draft. The Wizards are playing. Busy time. Not even lacrosse. You know, I'm not the biggest lacrosse guy, but a lot of that going on around here as well. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere the internet is served. Our morning newspaper reaches you at 7 a.m. each and every morning. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Oh, by the way, I'm wearing my Brigade shirt, too. I want to make sure I point that out. The AFL action starting this week. We're going to talk to Ron Jaworski as well as Ted Leonsis and others about AFL football, the debut here in early May at the Royal Farms Arena, so we'll be promoting that a little bit too as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. If you want to go to London with us, by the way, on the aforementioned road trip, we get $100 off right now for anybody that's been on a WNST road trip in the past. That's 18,000 of you. So if you want to do that, throw me an email. We'll make sure that we take great care of you and get you to London. Also, Green Bay, Nashville, Minnesota, and wherever the Raiders are playing. Who the heck knows where that's going to be? I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore Sports.